In this tutorial, we're going to go over how you can create a custom heat map using whatever image you would like by essentially drawing in the different regions and then color coding them based on a value of your data set. So to get started, we've got our data here. So we've got a date, player, and then 4 different regions so that my heat maps can be specific to the body. You can, of course, use any image that you want and kind of any of the regions that you want. And this is going to be in reference to some pane levels. So first thing to do is go ahead and turn your data into a table itself. So insert a table, and then we're going to name this table data. Okay, let's change the name of the sheet here. We're going to add in a couple sheets, and this is just going to help us to kind of keep everything organized. So one we'll just call heat map, the other we'll call ref for references. In our heat map, we're going to have a date picker, and then we're going to have a player selector. Okay, and let's go ahead and make these a little bit bigger and wider. All right, so just to start off, we'll kind of put in one of the dates that we have and put in one of our players. And now go ahead and bring in the image that you want. So I just got this body image straight from Google, and we'll be drawing in the different regions of the body. Now, before we do that, we want to make sure that we kind of have our heat map data in a nice organized fashion that corresponds to the date and to the player. So down below, we're going to go ahead and add essentially a heat map organizer. And for this, we're going to need the order, the regions, and then the value. All right, so for the regions, these are going to be the 4 regions that I have here. You can have more regions than this, of course, just to keep this a little simpler. I just have four different regions. So when we paste these in, I just want the values. And we're going to call them 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, now we need to go and look up the values so that they match each region with the date and the player. So to do this, we're going to do an average ifs. And we want to average our table data. This is going to be our quad 1. And the criteria we want to match is table data date. This needs to equal our date up here. Go ahead and lock that date in with, you can either type $signs before the B and before the 1, or you can use F4, whichever you prefer. And we also want the table data player to match our player here. Go ahead and lock that in as well and close it. All right, so if we take a look on 4.1, Scooby-Doo should have a pane level of 8 for his quads. Take a look, sure enough. All right, let's take a look if we change it to 4.2. Now it says 7. Perfect. Okay, so we can go ahead and copy this and paste the formula down. But now we need to change it so it's not taking the average of quad 1, but this is going to be quad 2. This will be hams 1, and this will be hams 2. All right, so we have our different values for each of those regions. Next, we're going to want to put together a color table that we will essentially reference based on the value, what color do we want that region to be. So we're going to have a minimum value and then a color itself. The minimum value, so that's going to essentially index this, and it's going to look for, okay, when it's less than this, we're going to make it this certain color. And so we'll just kind of go in increments of 2 here. The scale I'm using is out of 10 points, with 10 being the max, so we want to go a little bit higher than 10. All right, so for the colors, if it's 0, we don't want any color, so go ahead and put white in. And now you can use kind of whatever colors you want. I'm just going to, for simplicity, just kind of follow this built-in kind of color bar that Excel has. As I said, you can use whatever colors you want. All right, now we need to name each of these cells individually too, and it's something that we're going to reference. So for this first one, we're going to call it color 0. Next will be color 1. And if you have more than one, or more than these 6 color regions, just keep adding the next number to them after the name color. 4, and then color 5. All right. So when we take a look at each cell, it's now named appropriately: color 0, color 1, color 2, color 3, color 4, and color 5. Okay, so as I said, we're going to be using macros to kind of help us out so we don't have to run these specifically. Remember, these macros are only going to be usable with this macro enabled Excel book that's on your desktop. It's not functional online in Google Sheets or OnlineExcel. So we'll just call this our macro helper. We're going to have the order, the region, the data value itself for that region, and then the color code. All right, so for this, we're just going to go ahead and put a 1 in there. We want to now go and match, okay, for order 1, what is that region? So we're going to use this index function, and we're going to use our regions as our index. So go ahead and select those columns and rows, lock them in, and now we want to match. So we need to match our order number here, lock that in, with the order number we have in our heat map organizer. We'll go ahead and lock that in as well. We want it to be an exact match, so we're going to make that a 0 and close it off. All right, so now this is saying order, the first one is going to be quad 1. That looks right. If we say 3, hams 1. Perfect. All right, so let's go ahead and make that 1 again. We can now copy that down and paste it in, and we're going to change it. So now, instead of using the region, we want to make this our value. Instead of using the order number, we want to use the region itself, and we're going to match that to the regions. So now it's saying, all right, for quad 1, what's the value we get? 7. Perfect. Let's just double check. For hams, we get 2. Excellent. Working just like we want it to. Okay, and now we're going to do kind of one more thing with that. Now we have to look up, all right, what's our color code? And so we know these are all color and then some type of number. And now we want to say, okay, let's take a look at this value, and we want to find where it's greater than the previous minimum value, but less than that current one. And that's going to be, okay, what color index it gets essentially. So to do this, essentially, we're going to use this if error function. And we're going to put color in parentheses. And we want to match now. So we're going to go ahead and match our data value. Let's lock that in. And we're going to match it with our minimum values here. Lock that table in. And now we want it to be less than, so we're going to put a 1. So if there's an error, that means it's not able to calculate some number. If it's blank, and say, okay, if there's no data there, we're going to call it color 0. All right, so this is saying our data value 7 corresponds to color 4. So if we take a look here, 7's between the 6 and the 8. So we want it to be this 4 here. Let's take a look at 3. It's going to be our color 1. So it's a value of 2. So it's less than 2.1. So it's going to be this value here. But it's not less than 0.1, so it won't be blank. Okay, so that's working just like we should have it work. Next thing we're going to do is we want to now draw in our body regions themselves. So this is where it gets a little tedious and takes the most time. The more regions you have, the more drawing you have to do. So what we're going to do is we're going to insert a custom shape. So we're going to use the scribble tool. So quad 1 is going to correspond to the right quad for me. So I'm just going to draw in the section as best I can. This tool doesn't do a great job of drawing, but I'll take that. We need to name it quad 1 now. So these names of the regions that we draw have to line up with the regions that we have listed here. So I've got quad 1, perfect. I'm going to copy and paste so the body's symmetrical. I can just flip horizontally, move it to the left quad, and we're going to call this quad 2. All right, I'm going to do the same drawing for my hamstrings now. So we'll start with the right hamstring. Okay, and this is going to be my hams 1. And now copy, paste. Let's flip horizontally. And this will be my hams 2. so you just go ahead and draw that for each one. For now, just leave the shapes filled in as they are. It's going to help us to actually see where those regions are. I'm just going to move that around a little bit. All right, so we've got our 4 regions that correspond to these. Now we need to make it so it matches up with our color bar. But before we do that, I actually want to make this a little more functional. So instead of typing in the date here to change it and typing in the player, we're going to have these different developer tools where we'll have a spinner and then a combo box that will allow you to just click up or down to change the date, or a drop-down box to let you choose the player. So to do this, we're going to hop into our reference page, and we're going to set this up a little bit for us. So we're going to have our player drop-down, and we'll have the player selection. Okay. We need to give each player their own unique ID. And so to do this, we're going to use this unique value. And we're going to look in our table data, and we want to look at players. So this is going to pull out all the unique players that we have. So we have 2. And then we'll just assign values to each one. So 1 and 2. Let me slide these up. Okay, so what we're going to do is so we'll just put in a value of 1 here for now. We're going to do, so if there's an error function again, that means, okay, the number that we have doesn't correspond to a player. So we want it, instead of just telling us there's an error, we're going to say no player. That way we know, okay, we can't actually select it. So if there's an error when we index this here, go ahead and lock in the row. So we're going to index the player ID, and we want to match, we want to index the player. So we're going to do D to D. So we're indexing the player, and we want to match our selection here with the player ID. Okay. And we want it to be a perfect match. And now if there's an error, we're going to say, okay, no player. All right, so 1 is Scooby-Doo. 2 is Donald Duck. 3, no player. Perfect. All right, so we've got that drop-down selection kind of created now. What we're going to go for our player selection now, I'm going to actually delete Scooby-Doo. Now delete this, and we're going to add in a combo box. So this combo box is what we're going to link. So if we go to format control, our input range is going to be our players, and we'll say OK. So now we've got our players here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to link this so it gives us an output. So cell link, we're going to link it to that player selection there. All right, Scooby-Doo is 1. Donald Duck is 2. Perfect. All right, we're going to do the same thing with our date picker now. So this one we're going to do a scroll bar instead. So scroll bar and date selection. We're going to have a date ID, and we're going to have the date itself. So this is again where we're going to use our unique function. We're going to go to table, data, and our date. And now it's we need to change the format to date format. And now what we also want to do is sort it. That way it's going to put it in order from the oldest date to the newest date. Okay, so we need to give each one its own individual ID, so you can just do that 1, 2, and 3 again. Or what you can do is if so what we need to do is give each of the dates their own ID, so you can do 1, 2, and 3 again. Or you can do an actual formula that says equals if the minimum value of our table date equals our value here, then we're going to say, okay, that's number 1. If it doesn't equal it, then we're going to say, okay, we're going to take the previous value and we're going to add 1. Perfect. And then if we copy that down, equals, oh, we don't want to lock this in this time. Now if we copy this down, perfect. All right, so scroll bar selection. So we're just gonna put this 1 in here. We can copy this, paste it in here. Oh, copy this. Paste it in here. Now we're going to change this. I'm going to move these over to our date ID, into the scroll bar value. And then change this to a date short. All right, so then when we change that, perfect. All right, now we need to go ahead and add in a spinner. So we're going to draw a spinner in right here. And we're going to format the control. So current value we'll just say as 1. We're going to go ahead and link the cells. So this is going to get linked to date range here. Oh, sorry. The cell link is going to get linked to our scroll bar selection there. And we'll say OK. So now we go through section 1. And we're going to say this is now equal to our date selection. So now when we change this, it goes through and automates the date. I want to do it now if there's an error. So if this equals blank, we're going to say no data, else we're going to say it equals that. So here we're going to change this to just a blank. All right, so if we scroll through here, you'll see we don't have data for 4.3, so we need to go back to 4.2. All right, perfect. Now you see we've got these errors down here. So something easy to do is, so this is matching that correctly. Now it's looking for our player that we don't have. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this. Instead of matching it with B2, we're going to match it with our reference in the player selection. Okay? So in 4.3, Donald Duck should not have any pain in the quads, and he does not. Okay, so let's go ahead and copy that down again. We'll change these, quad 1, this is now quad 2. Take a look, no pain. This is going to be hams 1, and this is going to be hams 2. All right, so now we've got that built out. And we've got everything ready to go for our macro. So as I said, this has to be a macro-enabled book. So if you go to Save As, we need to save it as Excel macro-enabled book. Okay, and I'm just going to call it Heatmap. All right, so when we go into the development now, we're going to want to do this record macro. So this is what's going to happen when it's going to go through and essentially change these numbers, and then it will update and tell us, okay, what region needs to be what color. Before we do that, we need to name these cells. So this order is going to be our act order. Our region is going to be our act location. Data value is going to be the act value, and the color code is going to be the act color code. All right, so we've got that named. let's go ahead and record a macro. We can call it Heatmap. And now if you go to your macros, we want to edit it. So you can delete kind of that text that gets brought in. First thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to define this dimension I as an integer. Okay, so we're going to run through this I number of times where I equals 1 to the number of regions we have. So I have 2 regions, or sorry, I have 4 regions, so I'm going to say 1 to 4. If you have more than 4 regions, you would say 1 to 10, or however many regions you have. First thing we're going to do is we want to paint the shape color based on the act color code. To do this, we're going to say range, and we want the act order dot value to equal I. And in our active sheet, in our shapes, so this is where we named all of our shapes, range, it's going to be the act location. This would be dot value, plus a parentheses, and we want to say the fill dot for color dot RGB equals, we're going to put this underscore so that we can go to the next line. Let's go ahead and indent in. It says it doesn't like that expression yet, so let's finish the expression. Range, our act color code dot value dot interior dot color. Okay, so now let's go ahead and indent that in. All right, so this is telling us, all right, for act I, or the order I, the location color needs to be that color that we had identified it as. So next we're going to say, all right, let's make the shape transparent if the act value equals 0. So if there's no value, no pane reported, we don't want it to show up. We want it to be completely clear. So we're going to do an if statement. If our range of the act value dot value equals 0, then we want to say for the active sheet, we're going to do this actually. We're going to copy this. We're going to say our active sheets, the fill dot transparency is going to equal 0. So fully transparent. And then we're going to end the if statement. Let's go ahead and indent this again to make it a little cleaner. All right, so now we want to make it a solid fill. Make shape solid fill if act value is greater than 0. So I put this single quote, and that's just going to comment it out so the code doesn't try to execute anything. So now we're going to say if that value is greater than 0, we want the transparency to be 1. Last thing we want to do here is I don't want any type of outline around my shape. So I'm going to say the line transparency is going to be set to 0. Okay, and then we want to repeat this for all values of I. So we just say next I. All right, so we've got our macro built out. Let's go ahead and stop recording. So then if we hop back to our macro, we've got this saved. Donald Duck should have 0, 0, 2, and 8 values. So both the quads should not appear, and then we should have a light red for the right hams and a darker red for the left hams when we run it. So if we take a look at this, let's go ahead and run the code. No errors popped up, and looked and actually said, oh, everything is empty. So let's take a look at the code. Act valid fail transparency line transparency equals 0. Line transparency needs to be 1. I have these backwards. Full transparency here, no transparency there. Okay, so when we don't want it to be transparent, we want the transparency to be 1 for full, 0 solid fill. So I just had those backwards. Let's go ahead and run it again, and voila. So the outline's gone, no pain there. All right, let's go ahead and change the date. So we see our values has changed here. We can run it again. There you go. So high levels of pain in the quads and hamstrings, in the right hamstring, left hamstring, low pain value in the right hamstring. All right, so now instead of having to click on run each time, we're gonna go ahead and link this macro to each of these boxes. So when you change the date, it will automatically update it. When you change the player, it will also automatically update it. So if you right click at it and say assign macro, we're gonna assign the heat map. So now I change the date, automatically changes. So we got an error there, no data, wasn't able to run that, which is fine. Let's do the same thing now for the player selector. So when we change this to Scooby-Doo, everything changes. All right, so there you go. You can, as I said, you can have as many regions as you want. The most tedious part is just going to be drawing the regions themselves and getting them to actually fit how you want them to. But there you have it. So thanks for the time. Please reach out to me if you have any questions. And I hope you have as much fun with this as I did.